They entertained millions of people and earned fortunes that most of us can only dream about. So how did so many British television legends end up broke, forgotten, or living in poverty?
Hello, young man. So you're Clarissa's young friend.
Yes, sir. How do you do, sir?
Today we're counting down 15 iconic TV stars whose lives took shocking turns, from Sid James, who gambled away a fortune, and Tommy Cooper, whose career was devastated by massive tax debts, to Freddie Starr, who lost everything after a £1 million legal battle. But nothing compares to number one, a beloved British star who went from Hollywood fame, luxury homes, and racehorses to living in a damp charity flat, relying on a benefit concert organized by friends just to survive. Stay with us, because every story proves one thing: fame doesn't guarantee a happy ending.
Excuse me, madam.
Miss.
Oh, miss.
Number 15, Huey Green. We're starting at number 15 with Huey Green. If you watched British television during the 1960s and 1970s, you know this name. Huey Green hosted Opportunity Knocks, a talent competition that pulled in millions of viewers every single week. This wasn't background television. This was appointment viewing. Families gathered around their sets specifically to watch what Huey would do next. He had the presence, the charm, and the instinct for spotting raw talent. Artists and comedians he discovered on that show went on to become household names themselves, people who owed their entire careers to being spotted on Huey Green's platform. For years, he was one of the most recognizable faces in Britain. Instantly recognizable, extremely well paid. The money matched the fame. But behind the television cameras, his life was substantially messier. Huey drank heavily, not casually, but in a way that affected his judgment and his finances. He poured enormous sums of money into business ventures that failed one after another. None of them worked out. He seemed unable to make good decisions about where his money went once he left the studio. A major personal scandal also hit the newspapers late in his career, and it damaged both his reputation and his income simultaneously. The tabloids were brutal. The scandal was the kind that lingered, the kind that changed how people perceived him as a public figure. By the time Huey Green died in 1997, the man who had once discovered Britain's biggest entertainers was largely out of the spotlight. Far fewer people remembered him, far fewer people knew his name, and his bank account reflected decades of poor decisions, not decades of brilliant work. His story is instructive because it shows something crucial: how quickly a massive career can quietly fade away, even when millions of people once knew your face and tuned in religiously every single week just to hear you speak. Fame does not equal lasting wealth. Fame does not equal security. And sometimes it takes only a few years of bad choices to undo what decades of good work created.
Thank you, friends. Bless you all. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome to our very first show on television.
Number 14, Dick Emery.
Hello, young man. So you're Clarissa's young friend.
Yes, sir. How do you do, sir?
Number 14 is Dick Emery. Dick Emery made an entire country laugh every single week. His sketch comedy show ran on the BBC for years, consistent, reliable, funny. His catchphrase, delivered by one of his many comic characters, became one of the most quoted lines in British comedy history. People would repeat it in pubs, in offices, at dinner tables. It had worked its way into the fabric of British culture. During the 1970s, he was one of the top earners in British light entertainment. No question. The money was substantial. But Dick Emery's personal life was expensive in ways that his millions of viewers never saw. He was married several times, divorce after divorce. Each one came with a significant financial settlement, the kind of money that disappears in legal fees and alimony payments. On top of that, he was generous by nature. He spent freely on the people around him. He gave money away. He didn't hesitate when someone needed help. This sounds admirable, and in human terms it was, but financially it was devastating. Over time, this steady drain on his finances, the divorces, the generosity, the lifestyle he maintained added up to an enormous hole. When Dick Emery died in 1983, Reports at the time suggested his money troubles were far more serious than the general public ever realized. Nobody talks about it now. But people close to him knew. A man who had filled living rooms with laughter every single week for years, who had created characters people still quoted decades later, left behind a much smaller fortune than his decades of stardom might have suggested. His story is a stark reminder that a large paycheck does not automatically mean lasting wealth. Money can leave the bank account almost as fast as it arrives. Faster, sometimes, and personal circumstances, marriages, divorces, generosity can quietly dismantle financial security without anyone on the outside ever knowing about it.
Excuse me, madam. Miss. Oh, miss.
Number 13, Diana Dors. Number 13 takes us to Diana Dors. Diana Dors was Britain's glamorous answer to Hollywood's biggest blonde bombshells. She starred in films and television throughout the 1950s and well beyond. For an extended period of time, she was one of the most photographed women in the entire country. Magazine covers, tabloid headlines. She was genuinely famous in the way that only a few people ever become famous. Enormous sums of money came with that fame. She earned what would be substantial money even by today's standards. But Diana Dors had a serious habit of investing in business ventures that failed one after another. She would pour money into projects that looked promising on paper, but never materialized into anything real. Not one or two failures. Multiple failures. The money kept going out. The investments kept collapsing. Add to that a series of very large tax bills. The tax authorities were coming after her for substantial amounts. Her finances didn't just strain, they began to unravel catastrophically. At one point, the tax authorities actually moved to seize her property to cover what she owed. Imagine that, having your house threatened because the tax debt had become that serious. She kept working right up until the very end of her life, not entirely by choice, but because she needed the income desperately. She had no other option. Diana Dors died from cancer in 1984. Those close to her later confirmed what the public didn't know: money worries had shadowed her final years. Not occasionally. Constantly, she was thinking about money when she should have been focusing on her health. A star who once symbolized British glamour, who once graced magazine covers across the entire country, spent her last chapter fighting to stay financially afloat, not enjoying the rewards of a long and successful career. Fighting, struggling, the contrast is genuinely difficult to process. Number 12, Bella Emberg. Number 12 is Bella Emberg. Viewers might not immediately recognize this name, but anyone who grew up watching British comedy in the 1980s will remember her instantly. She played a character simply known as Woman alongside comedian Russ Abbott on his hugely popular primetime sketch show. Millions of people watched every single week. She was a familiar, beloved face on British television. Kids knew her, adults knew her. She was woven into the fabric of that era of comedy. But here's the painful reality. Being well-known and being financially secure turned out to be two completely different things. That's the lesson her story teaches, and it's a lesson that applies to thousands of performers across the entertainment industry. Her work came in bursts. She would land a great role, something substantial, something that paid well, and then months would pass with no bookings at all. Nothing. Radio silence. Producers loved her comic timing. Directors wanted to work with her, but the steadier, better-paid dramatic roles rarely came her way. That was the trap facing so many character actors of her era. You become known for one thing, one type of role, one specific character, and then that's all anyone wants to cast you in. And when those roles dry up, there's nowhere else to go. In her later years, Bella Emberg spoke honestly and publicly about her circumstances. She was surviving mostly on basic state benefits. The same benefits that millions of ordinary working people rely on when they've reached retirement age or fallen on hard times. She worried about paying her rent, just like millions of ordinary people do. A woman who had made a whole nation laugh, who had provided entertainment to millions, managed her difficulties quietly and without complaint until she passed away in 2018. Her story is a clear reminder that fame does not come with a pension attached, no matter how many millions of people knew her face and loved her work. The industry doesn't protect you. The applause doesn't pay the bills. Number 11, Richard Beckinsale. Number 11 is Richard Beckinsale. In the mid-1970s, Richard Beckinsale was on track to become one of the defining stars of his entire generation. He was not someone who might make it. He was someone who clearly would. He played the lovable Lenny Godber in Porridge, one of the most loved sitcoms in BBC history, a show that is still considered one of the finest British comedies ever made. Critics adore it. Audiences adore it. It endures. At the very same time, he played the charming Alan in Rising Damp on ITV. Both shows were massive hits simultaneously. Both audiences adored him. Picture that, two of the biggest sitcoms on British television, and he was the star of both. He was just 29 years old, hugely talented, and everything ahead of him seemed set to build on that success exponentially. The trajectory was clear. The future was bright. It never got the chance to develop. Richard Beckinsale died suddenly in March 1979 from an undetected heart problem. He was only 31 years old. His career simply had not had enough time to turn into real financial security. There had been no time to save substantial amounts of money. No time to buy property. No time for the growing income that years of steady success usually brings. No time to build the kind of cushion that protects you later in life. His death was so sudden that his young family, including his daughter who would later become actress Kate Beckinsale, were left in real financial difficulty. Kate was only 5 years old. She had no memories of her father's success. She would grow up knowing only that her father had died young. This is not a story of bad choices, poor spending, or gambling losses at the bookmakers. It's not a story of mistakes. It's a story of stolen time. A career cut off right before it could transform into the kind of lasting security his family would desperately need. It's one of the most unfair entries on this entire list because Richard Beckinsale did nothing wrong. He simply didn't live long enough. Number 10, Jack Hargreaves. Number 10 is Jack Hargreaves. Jack Hargreaves may not be a familiar name to younger audiences today, but to an entire generation of British families, he was one of the warmest, most trusted faces on television. He presented Out of Town, a gentle, unhurried show about the British countryside, fishing, and rural life. The kind of life many viewers had left behind, but still felt connected to. He also appeared regularly on a popular children's program as a wise, pipe-smoking grandfather figure. Millions of people trusted him. Millions watched him every single week. He represented something real. He represented connection to a simpler way of life. Then, in 1981, something catastrophic happened. The broadcaster he worked for lost its television license completely. It vanished almost overnight. Just like that, the company essentially ceased to exist as a television operator. And so did most of Jack Hargreaves' income. The steady paycheck disappeared. The regular work disappeared. The structure that had supported his life for decades vanished. Today, a presenter with his level of fame would likely have long-term contracts, guaranteed repeat fees, and pension plans built up over the years. These protections exist now because of lessons learned from situations exactly like Jack Hargreaves. In the early 1980s, almost none of that protection existed. The television industry had not yet built the systems to look after the people who filled its schedules. The talent was expendable. The structure didn't exist to protect people like him. Jack Hargreaves retired to the countryside he had spent years celebrating on screen. But without the financial comfort his decades of work should have earned him. He died in 1994, aged 80, largely forgotten by the very industry that had once relied on him completely. Think about that. An industry built on his face, his voice, his presence, and when the money stopped, they moved on. His story shows how quickly television can move on from the people it once built entire schedules around, even after decades of loyal, quiet service. Before we continue to the next entries, please hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who remembers these names. Comment below which story has stayed with you so far. The stories from here get progressively harder. Number 9, Wilfrid Brambell. Number 9 is Wilfrid Brambell. If you have ever watched Steptoe and Son, you already know Wilfrid Brambell. He played Albert Steptoe, the filthy, scheming, grumpy old rag and bone man who made his son's life a constant misery and made millions of viewers laugh until it hurt. The character is iconic. Brambell's performance is the thing people remember. It's still considered one of the greatest sitcoms ever made in Britain. The show ran through the 1960s and into the 1970s, pulling in audience numbers that would be extraordinary by today's standards. We're talking about ratings that represented a significant percentage of the entire British population choosing to watch him perform. Here is the problem Brambell shared with most British actors of that era. He was paid one flat fee per episode. That was simply how the system worked. One payment. Done? There were no royalties, no repeat fees, no payment when the show aired again, which it did constantly, because it was cheap to broadcast and enormously popular. Every single time Steptoe and Son was shown again, and it was shown again constantly, Wilfrid Brambell received absolutely nothing extra. The broadcaster kept profiting, the audience kept laughing. The actor who created that unforgettable character, the performance that made people remember him decades later, received not one extra penny. On top of that, he faced serious tax debts and struggled with severe typecasting. After playing Albert Steptoe, producers mostly wanted him for grumpy old men roles, and those roles were rare and poorly paid. He became trapped by his own success. The character that made him famous also made it impossible to move beyond that character. He spent his final years in a small flat with very little money left. The gap between the joy his performance gave to millions of families and the reality of his final years is genuinely difficult to make sense of. He died in 1985, and by then his finances had deteriorated significantly. Number 8. Sid James. Number 8 is Sid James. Sid James is one of the most recognizable faces in the history of British entertainment. That cheeky grin, that raspy laugh, that perfect comic timing. He was the heart of the Carry On film series, appearing in more of them than almost anyone else. And he also led the popular Id Vive sitcom Bless This House through the early 1970s. He worked constantly, for 2 decades straight. By every normal measure, Sid James should have died a wealthy man. He had that much work, that much visibility, that much earning potential. He did not die wealthy because he had a serious and destructive gambling addiction, one built entirely around horse racing. According to people who worked with him, it operated at an alarming level. This wasn't a casual flutter. This was systematic, daily loss of money. He would collect his pay from the studio, leave the building, and lose it all at the bookmakers that same afternoon. This was not a secret. It was simply the pattern of his life, week after week, film after film. For years the money came in and it went straight back out. The cycle never stopped. Nobody could stop it. Sid James died on stage during a live theater performance in April 1976. He collapsed in front of an audience who at first thought it was part of the act. Some people laughed, some people didn't realize anything was wrong until emergency services arrived. When his estate was examined afterward, there was almost nothing left. A career that long and that successful had produced almost no lasting financial legacy at all. All those films, all those television appearances, all those performances, and nothing to show for it. His story remains one of the most sobering examples of how a habit repeated quietly for years can undo decades of hard, steady work. The money was there, the opportunity was there, the talent was there, but the addiction was more powerful than all of it combined. Number 7, John Laurie. Number 7 is John Laurie. For anyone of a certain age, John Laurie's face and voice belonged to a very specific and much-loved period of British life. As Sergeant Arthur Wilson in Dad's Army, he was the quietly confused, endlessly polite counterpart to Arthur Lowe's magnificently pompous Captain Mainwaring. He was absolutely essential to one of the most beloved shows the BBC has ever made. Dad's Army is still shown regularly today. It has barely ever left the schedules, making it one of the most repeated programs in British television history. It's a show that has provided entertainment continuously for multiple generations. And yet, John Laurie spent his later years genuinely worried about money. The problem was straightforward. Under the contracts of that era, repeat fees were tiny, almost meaningless. Every time Dad's Army aired again, and it aired constantly, the cast received amounts that barely made a difference to their cost of living, maybe a few pounds, maybe nothing at all, depending on the contract structure. The broadcaster kept the ratings. The audience kept the entertainment. The performers were left with very little in return. On top of this, Laurie faced serious health problems and relied heavily on charities set up specifically to help older actors who could not manage on what their careers had actually paid them. These charities existed because the system had failed so many people like him. He died in 1983. A man who brought that much warmth into British homes, who made an entire nation feel a little calmer every week when he appeared on screen, spent his final years worrying about his bills. Not occasionally, not at certain times, constantly, and that was simply what happened. It was not an exaggeration, it was not a rumor circulating among industry people. It was his everyday reality, hidden behind a familiar, friendly face that millions of people trusted completely. Number 6, Tommy Cooper. Number 6 is Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper was a genius. Not in the casual way that word gets thrown around today, but in the true, genuine sense. What he did on stage was incredibly difficult, and he made it look completely effortless. The battered fez, the huge physical presence, the magic tricks that went wrong at exactly the right moment every single time. It was precision comedy disguised as chaos. He was a giant of British entertainment from the 1950s all the way through to the early 1980s. The public affection for him was enormous. People loved him. Genuinely loved him. By most accounts, Tommy Cooper was not reckless with money. He was not a heavy gambler. He did not live wildly beyond his means. He was careful. And yet, when his finances were finally looked at closely, the picture was troubling. He owed a very large amount in unpaid taxes, built up quietly over many years, not through any dishonesty, not through fraud, simply because careful financial management was not yet standard practice in the entertainment world at that time. The industry didn't teach people how to handle money. There were no advisors. Nobody told him to set money aside for taxes. When Tommy Cooper collapsed and died during a live television broadcast in April 1984, in one of the most shocking moments in British broadcasting history, watched by millions in real time, the tax authorities had already claimed a large share of everything he had earned across his whole career. The debt was already there. The claim had already been made. Earning a lot of money and keeping a lot of money are two completely different things. Tommy Cooper's story makes that difference painfully clear. It stands as one of the sharpest examples on this entire list of how quietly a fortune can slip away, even from someone who never seemed reckless with it, even from someone who was trying to do things right. Number 5, Charlie Drake. Number 5 is Charlie Drake. Charlie Drake was a phenomenon, one of the most watched comedians on British television through the 1960s and into the 1970s. Small in size, endlessly energetic, and completely without regard for his own safety when it came to physical comedy, he threw himself into slapstick stunts that regularly landed him in hospital. He took it that seriously. He would do anything for a laugh. At his peak, the money matched the fame completely. He owned racehorses, he owned expensive cars, he lived in a large mansion. By the standards of most working people in Britain at that time, he was extremely, genuinely comfortable. Wealthy, secure, then two things dismantled it all, and together they proved impossible to survive. The first was gambling, specifically betting on his own racehorses. This combined the normal risks of gambling with the extra difficulty of betting on animals he was emotionally attached to. You can't make rational decisions about horses you own and care about. The second was a huge retrospective tax bill. The tax authorities reassessed years of his earnings and landed on a figure that was truly enormous. Together, these two forces wiped out everything he had built. The mansion was sold. The horses were sold. The cars were sold. In his final years, Charlie Drake lived simply and modestly. What stands out about his story is how calm he seemed about it. He reportedly said he had gambled it away and had made peace with that. He had accepted it. He died in 2006 with very little left, and by most accounts, very little regret either. That kind of calm acceptance, after losing a mansion, a fleet of cars, and a stable of racehorses, is its own remarkable thing. It makes his story stand apart from almost everyone else on this list. Number 4, Freddie Starr. Number 4 is Freddie Starr. At his peak, Freddie Starr was a genuine force of nature. There was nobody else on British television quite like him. An impressionist, a comedian, and a singer who could hold an audience completely still and then do something totally unexpected that flipped the whole night on its head. He was one of the highest paid entertainers in Britain across the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Decades of consistent top-level work. And he became the subject of one of the most famous tabloid headlines in British newspaper history. A headline that made his name known even to people who had never watched him perform. It was the kind of headline that transcended entertainment and became part of the cultural conversation. But the fall was just as dramatic as the rise. Freddie Starr became involved in a serious legal dispute over his reputation and chose to fight it in court. That's an understandable decision if you believe you have been wronged. You want your name cleared. You want vindication. But legal battles in England are extremely expensive. The costs are astronomical, and when he lost the case, he was left owing a legal bill of roughly £1 million. 1 million. That's not a typo. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual figure. To cover it, he sold his home in Britain and moved into a modest apartment on the coast of southern Spain. Living out his final years far from the country that had made him a household name, mostly on a basic state pension. He was living abroad because he could no longer afford to live at home. A man who had once sold out major venues across the country was now living quietly on the Spanish coast, far from the industry that had made him famous. He died there in May 2019. The distance between that peak-packed theaters and record-breaking television ratings and that final quiet apartment on the Spanish coast is one of the sharpest falls on this entire list. It shows just how fast one legal battle can undo an entire lifetime of earnings. Number 3, Michael Elphick. Number 3 is Michael Elphick. Michael Elphick had a rare gift as an actor. He could be funny, warm, and completely believable all at the same time, which is much harder to pull off than it sounds. When he took the lead role of Jim Bergerac in the IT detective drama Bergerac during the late 1980s, audiences fell for him almost instantly. The character worked because Michael Elphick made it work. At its peak, the show pulled in over 11 million viewers every single week. That's an absolutely enormous portion of the entire British population choosing to watch him specifically. He later joined EastEnders, the country's most watched soap opera, which pushed his fame even higher. He had multiple major platforms, his face was everywhere, his career was genuinely thriving. But behind that professional success, Michael Elphick was fighting a severe, long-running battle with alcoholism. It was not something he could hide or contain for long. It steadily damaged his ability to work, strained the professional relationships that keep a career alive, and quietly ate away at the money his success had brought him. He died of a heart attack in September 2002 at just 55 years old. The earnings from a television career that had entertained millions of people had been almost entirely consumed by his illness. His story is not one of carelessness or bad decisions made on purpose. It's a story of illness, plain and simple. A story of a man who never got the help he needed in time, despite being loved by millions of viewers every single week for years on end. The industry didn't save him. The fame didn't protect him. The money couldn't save him. Number 2, Tony Hancock. Number 2 is Tony Hancock. To understand Tony Hancock's story properly, you first need to understand how enormous his success actually was. Because without that context, what came next does not make sense. Hancock's Half Hour was not just a popular show, it was a genuine cultural event. It changed what British radio and television comedy could achieve. By the end of the 1950s, Tony Hancock was without much argument the biggest comedy star in Britain. He worked with two of the finest comedy writers this country has ever produced, Galton and Simpson. Together they created episodes still studied and still genuinely funny today. People analyze them, they quote them, they hold them up as examples of perfect comedy writing. Convinced that the show's success was entirely his own doing, convinced that his talent alone had built everything, Hancock made the decision to part ways with those writers, one of the most damaging professional choices in British entertainment history. The creative partnership that had built his success could not be replaced. It couldn't be duplicated. The quality of his work declined almost immediately. He discovered, too late, that comedy is collaborative, that the writers had contributed something irreplaceable, that he needed them more than they needed him. At the same time, he battled severe alcoholism that grew worse as his career struggled. The drinking got heavier, his marriages fell apart, his finances crumbled along with everything else. By 1968, Tony Hancock was in Sydney, Australia, filming a struggling television series. He was 44 years old, alone, and in financial trouble on the other side of the world from the country that had once called him its greatest comic talent. Imagine that geography. Imagine that isolation. Imagine being 44, knowing you've destroyed your own career and being trapped on the other side of the planet. On the 25th of June 1968, he took his own life. From the very peak of British comedy to that lonely hotel room on the other side of the world in less than a decade, the scale of the fall is almost impossible to fully take in. It remains one of the saddest stories in the whole history of British entertainment. If you are struggling with difficult feelings yourself, please know that support is available, and reaching out to someone you trust is always a strong thing to do, not a weak one. Number 1, Terry Thomas. And here we are. Number 1. This is the story we mentioned at the very start. The benefit concert, the damp flat. The man whose friends had to raise money just to keep him housed and cared for. Terry Thomas. Born Thomas Terry Hall Stevens in London in 1911, he created one of the most perfectly crafted comic characters in British entertainment history. The gap in his teeth, the thin moustache, the beautifully tailored suits, the magnificent, over-the-top indignation. He played the definitive upper-class British troublemaker, self-important, hopelessly clumsy, easily outraged, absolutely hilarious. And he played that character with a precision that turned it into something like an art form. It was a complete creation. Every element worked perfectly together. He was far more than a British television star. He crossed the Atlantic and worked in Hollywood, appearing in major American films alongside some of the biggest directors and casts in the world. It's a mad, 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 mad world. Those magnificent men in their flying machines. He was in films that mattered, films that are still watched, films that are still studied, at his peak through the late 1950s and 1960s. Terry Thomas earned huge amounts of money and lived a life to match it. Fine homes, fine clothes. First-class travel around the world, he lived at a level that only a tiny percentage of people ever experience. Then, in the 1970s, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. As the illness progressed, his ability to work faded, and so did his income. His savings, which had never been carefully managed for the long term, ran out completely. The homes were sold. The life he had built piece by piece across 3 decades of international success was slowly taken apart by illness and by simple financial reality. When journalists found him in the late 1980s, Terry Thomas was living in a charity-funded flat in London with damp walls and almost no furniture. A man who had once been one of the most recognizable faces on 2 continents, who had lived in some of the finest homes in Europe, had been reduced to that. A damp council flat. Damp walls. Minimal possessions. The story shocked the entire British entertainment industry. In 1989, his friends and former colleagues organized a benefit concert specifically to raise money for his medical care and his living costs. People who had worked with him and admired him came together to make sure he was looked after in his final years. They had to. The system had not. He died in January 1990. He is number 1 on this list, not because his story is the most dramatic one in isolation, but because of the sheer distance between what he once had and what he was eventually left with. International fame. Hollywood films. 3 decades of steady, successful work, a completely constructed, glamorous life. And at the very end of it, a damp flat and a benefit concert organized by the people who never stopped caring about him. 15 people. 15 careers. 15 examples of how fame, no matter how big it looks from the outside, never guarantees anything beyond the moment it happens. Gambling took down Sid James and Charlie Drake. Taxes took down Tommy Cooper and Diana Dors. A legal battle finished Freddie Starr. Illness ended Michael Elphick and Terry Thomas. A television industry that did not pay its stars fairly left Wilfrid Brambell, Laurie, and Jack Hargreaves with almost nothing after decades of work. Alcohol and pride unraveled Tony Hancock, while Richard Beckinsale simply ran out of time before his success could turn into security. 15 different causes, and in every single case, the same painful result. If this kind of British television history is what you come here for, hit subscribe right now. Share this with someone who remembers these names. Tell us in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Did one of these entries shock you more than the others? Did you know about any of these situations before this video? Your comments genuinely help this channel grow and help us keep making documentaries at this level of depth and research. We'll see you in the next one.